Guys, it finally happened. A feature so great that it will go down in history as the greatest addition to BTD6 was implemented recently, and it has single-handedly rekindled my love for this game. I am, of course, talking about... Retry last round in chimps mode, baby, let's fucking go! Oh yeah, and the Mermonkey got added, I guess. So, it's no secret my BTD content has dwindled in recent months. It's as I've said already, I'm very in and out with this game. But to be completely honest, it's more than just that. For reasons I'm going to get into shortly, I've actually been really down on balloons recently. Like, I've had dips where I've not cared about the game so much and then months later I'm back into it. But I have to admit, I was very worried that from here on out, almost every single time BTD6 would get an update, it'd be the kind of thing where I see it, I play like 2 games with it, and then I'm like, eh, and then I just leave. Because that is often kind of how I felt about the game recently, and unfortunately I didn't see that changing in the near future. As a result, these past few months may well be the most I've ever been down on BTD in my entire history as a fan of the game ever since, like, BTD 1. That being said, this update has been monumentally huge in dragging me right back into the game and sparking back that love that I'd lost. Usually in Unpopular Chimps videos, I like to focus on the strategy, but this time I kind of want to take a bit of the scenic route. We'll get around to discussing the strat, but I'd first like to explain why I was losing hope, at least for the immediate future of balloons, and how this update brought upon such a change of heart in me.
Listen, I actually have no idea if what I'm about to say is considered a hot take in the community or not, but certainly by my account, I've got to be honest. I've not really talked that much about it until now because I don't like being negative for the sake of being negative, but I think considering there's a happy ending for me to end this on now, I feel ready to open up about something. I'm not gonna lie, I think that BTD6's history of tower releases has been pretty atrocious. I think we got off to a good start with the Alchemist and the Druid, but honestly, even from step 1, there were already problems. The Alchemist and the Druid themselves are fine towers, especially the Alchemist. I love the Alchemist. But one thing a lot of you might not remember is that when BTD6 first came out, there was actually a rather vocal group of people consisting of about half the player base who genuinely felt like BTD6 was an inferior game to BTD5. And some of that was understandable, the fact that BTD5 had hundreds of maps by the time BTD6 came out, and BTD6 couldn't be expected to have that many maps on release, I thought was reasonable. What I didn't think was quite as reasonable was that in the jump from BTD6 to BTD5, we lost 4 towers, but only gained 2. 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. We may have gained the Druid and the Alchemist, but to gain them, we had to lose the Mortar, the Engineer, the Dartling Gunner, and the Balloon Chipper. And while, yeah, they were added back into the game, only 3 of those 4 were added back in. The Balloon Chipper never got added back in and never will be added back in, according to the developers. And apparently the reason given is that it would be impossible to balance. And that is true that back in BTD5, the balloon chip was a balancing nightmare for its ability to infinitely store balloons by sucking them in. That was okay when it was just normal balloons, but when it was Moabs, when you got the wide funnel upgrade, then it became a huge problem. But I think that's kind of a ludicrous excuse, especially considering that BTD6 is the game that introduced the bad. You know, the big Moab that's immune to CC, knockback, stun, slow, suck-ins, anything like that. Hell, we also gave resistance to those kind of things, even if it wasn't complete immunity to the Zong. It's ludicrous that we're trying to argue that the Balloon Chipper is unbalanceable because of Moab stall, and then BTD6 adds like 50 Moab stall options to the game that are all balanced by the fact that higher tier Moabs have more resistance to stall. You know, I'm not gonna lie, that does come off as a little bit hypocritical to me, but ultimately, I'm not gonna die on this hill. I know that as much as I'd like it back, the Balloon Chipper is not ever coming back. And the 3 towers we did get back took years to be added all back into the game, and really set us back a long time in getting any new towers into BTD6. I mean, how old is BTD6 now? I actually need to double check. BTD6 is now just over 6 years old, and we're only now getting its 2nd ever actually brand new tower. And a lot of that is because of how long we spent just adding back in old towers that were removed in the first place. I think it's especially disappointing that the Balloon Chipper is the one they decided to abandon too, Because I suppose I don't have any hard evidence of this, but at least from what I could tell, it didn't seem like the Mortar or the Dartling were very popular towers at all. If anything, while I wouldn't have liked to have them removed, at the end of the day, if you had to pick any towers to remove from the game, I thought that the Mortar and Dartling were good choices. And yet they're the ones that get added back, and not the Balloon Chipper? When the Balloon Chipper was honestly quite a popular and beloved tower? I don't know. I personally feel like it might just be that they don't feel the Balloon Chipper is quote-unquote a balloonsy enough tower, for lack of a better word, and less so that they actually think it's unbalanceable. But either way, that's enough conspiracism. Because even once we got all these towers back into the game, we finally get the first actual brand new tower in all of BTD6, excluding launch, and it's the Beast Handler. And I think we got a little bit of rose-tinted glasses just because it had been so many years since the last time we'd actually seen a new BTD6 tower. But ultimately, we can be real about this now. I think the Beast Handler is one of the worst towers ever added to BTD6. I think there's good reason why it's so unpopular and no one really cares to use it anymore now that the honeymoon period is over. And so yeah, to be quite frank, I think that tower releases in BTD6 up until now have kind of been awful. But that's a big reason why the Mermonkey gives me hope. Because the Mermonkey isn't just finally a decent tower, a tower that doesn't suffer from the same issues as the tower releases that preceded it, but it goes beyond that. I genuinely think the Mermonkey is one of my new favorite towers in the entire game. And I'm not sure if it's pure happenstance or if the developers learned from their mistakes, but either way, I'd like to state what I feel the mistakes the developers have been making in recent memory are that have made their tower releases so underwhelming and poorly received, at least speaking for myself. These problems apply to just about every single post-launch tower that the game had. Probably the only post-launch tower that was added to the game that doesn't suffer from these issues is the Engineer, but even then the Engineer suffered a poor launch for its own reasons. It was pitifully underpowered for months when it first released, to the point where it was essentially only ever used for overclock in chimps. Outside of overclock, in chimps, the Engineer was practically a non-existent tower. The top path was woefully underpowered to the point of being useless, and the bottom path, while now it's one of the best farming options in the game, back then it used to be terrible for that. So the Engineer is a bit of a special case where it was more just that the tower was ludicrously underpowered rather than poorly designed. So let's focus on the remaining few towers. The Mortar, the Dartling Gunner, and the Beast Handler. Why do I think these towers were flops? Well, out of these three, I'd think that the least terrible one was probably the Mortar, but I just don't think the Mortar got much hype because no one really gets hyped about the Mortar. I'm not even saying this to dunk on you if you like the Mortar. I like it from time to time, but like, let's be real, almost no one's favorite tower is the Mortar. It's a very unpopular tower, and so I'm not surprised it didn't really generate much hype. And the first problem is probably the easiest to explain and identify, even if it is a little bit vibes-based, and it's a trend I might even blame the Mortar for starting. That being the trend of upgrade paths that are just, this upgrade does this upgrade does it more, this upgrade does it more, this upgrade does it more. Look at the top path of the Mortar. Bigger explosions. Explosions do 1 extra layer of damage. Bigger explosions plus stun. Bigger explosions. Bigger explosions. Okay, that's not the most interesting. But what about the middle path? Faster attack speed. Faster attack speed. Faster attack speed, and you can hit black balloons. Faster attack speed, and a stun ability. The bottom path was the only path for the Mortar that really had unique upgrades at each tier, and so I honestly think the most valuable addition to the game with the Mortar being added was Shattering Shells, as that actually had utility and was a brand new mechanic we'd never seen before. Other than Shattering Shells, I think that the Mortar was quite a disappointment. The next 3 points apply a lot to both the Beast Handler and the Dartling Gunner, and depending on the path, apply to the Mortar. But I would say it's easiest to envision this if you focus on the Dartling Gunner, and that would be a severe lack of utility. When I say utility, I mean things just besides damage. I mean things that buff your towers, things that debuff the balloons, decamos, knockbacks, stuns, freezes, glues, slows, whatever it may be. Utility is really cool because it adds depth to the game beyond just dealing damage and dealing more damage, and it also means that more higher synergy strategies will prevail, which means that you have to put more planning and thought into building a good defense. And that's kind of the fun and skill expression of balloons in the first place. The Beast Handler is certainly low on utility, but it at least has some. The birds being able to grab and move balloons is a big deal, and is slightly unique as you can change tracks with it, which you can't do with a conventional blowback. And the T-Rex Stomp, while it is a basic stun, is very useful. That being said, that's still not a lot of utility, and when you look at the Dartling Gunner, there's no utility there. No slows, no synergies, no decamos, no debuffs, no anything like that. The only thing you do have is the knockback on the bottom path. But even then, that wasn't even there when the Dartling Gunner first launched. That was a buff that was given to the tower later when the bottom path started struggling. So you can't even give it to the Dartling Gunner because it never had that from the beginning. The next point might sound like it's kind of an overlap, but I would say is a severe lack of synergy. Not only in that tower doesn't have a mechanic that can buff all the towers under the right circumstances, but also that it's not even a good buff target. The most obvious example is of course alch buffs, and unfortunately, when you look at the mortar, alch buffs are pretty useless, because the most significant benefits you get from alch buff are the pierce increase and the damage increase. But the mortar already does increase damage, so increasing the damage more doesn't really help much more than usual, and already has ludicrously high pierce, so the pierce increase does practically nothing. Outbuffing mortars as a result does very little at all to help them out. Same goes for the Dartling Gunner. Outbuffing an unupgraded Dartling is a big deal, but as soon as you get onto any of the 3rd or 4th tiers on any of the paths, outbuffs start doing nearly nothing to improve the tower, because its shots already do so much damage and have so much pierce that more damage and pierce does practically nothing. And the Beast Handler can't even be alch buffed. At the very least, the Mortar has synergy with Striker Jones, being an explosive tower, even if it's weaker than the synergy that Striker Jones has with bomb towers, but it only gets worse with the Beast Handler and the Dartling Gunner, because the support and military monkeys are the two categories with no synergy outside of monkey knowledge. And at least most of the other military monkeys belong to some smaller group that can buff themselves. You know, the boat and the sub are water monkeys. I already mentioned the mortar's an explosive monkey. The ace and the heli are flying monkeys that get buffed by Rosalia. Hell, even the sniper, while it doesn't really have a tribe it belongs to, snipers can at least buff themselves using elite sniper. The Dartling Gunner is the only military monkey in the entire game that gets no synergy with anything else, not even itself. Which brings us to the last point, which once again heavily applies to all 3 of these towers. It feels like a lot of these towers suffer from having no specialized purpose. Now, in fairness, this kind of already wraps into utility and synergy because that can give you purpose, but it's still possible, though rare, for a tower that's pure damage to still have a specialized purpose. If that tower has amazing single target damage or amazing AoE damage, that's fine. That can be a thing in its own right, and that's not a problem. But that's just the thing. Look at towers like the Beast Handler, like the Dartling Gunner, and like the Mortar. For the most part, these towers don't have a specialized purpose, even for their pure damage. Almost always, these towers have pretty good group damage and okay single target, but not busted group damage, and not too good single target, but not too bad either. They're all-rounders, but they're so well-rounded, quote-unquote, that means that they don't really have a specialized purpose. They just do damage, I guess. The only exceptions I can think of across all 45 upgrades between these 3 towers is probably the Mad on the Dartling Gunner and the Pop and Ore on the Mortar, with the Mad being a great single target option and the Pop and Ore being a great group damage option. All of the rest of the 43 upgrades that these towers share, the rest of them all kind of just do a bit of everything, and that's a problem. I mean, you can have some well-rounded towers, but let's be real, this game already has hundreds of upgrades in it. We have more than enough towers in this game that just do good, well-rounded damage. We need special purposes, we need utilities. We don't need to be seeing more of the same and more of the same. At this point, more than ever, we have to put more effort into making upgrades stand out and feel different because there's so many to choose from. So upgrades that just deal damage aren't interesting anymore. And at the end of the day, any upgrades that do just deal damage and not much else are always going to be obsolete no matter how good they are, so long as there's just one option in the game that's better. If there's 5 million options that are just well-rounded good damage, and you could pick any one you want, it doesn't even matter if there's a tower that does pretty good, cost-efficient, well-rounded damage. If it has no synergies, no utility, no specialized purpose at all, it has nothing that constitutes a good tower design, then you'll just pick any one of the other innumerable millions of upgrades you could pick from that do the same job, whichever one's currently meta, I guess. This is why there are so many towers in this game that seem decent, but no one seems to use them in chimps. It's because, quite frankly, a lot of them probably are decent, but there's just another tower that does its exact same job, but better. The worst part is, because of everything I just said, the only way you can make these extremely bland, extremely well-rounded to the point of being a problem towers that have no utility or specialties, the only way that you can make them good, the only way that they can ever be the correct answer in a defense is if they're so strong, they can just deal with everything better than an actually planned high synergy defense. But then the problem's quite obvious. If these well-rounded towers are actually good, that means that we've just cheapened the value of actually thinking about and pre-planning your defense, and thinking about weaknesses and synergies of your defense. Because if you can just pick a tower that has no weakness, requires no synergy, and you slap it down and it deals with everything, then shit, that really kind of just simplifies the game and makes it all boring, doesn't it? But then the problem is as well that even if you make them weak because they have no specialized purpose, if they're weak, they'll just be unusable. It doesn't matter how close they are to being good, so long as there's one other option out there that's better than it, it will always be terrible. So yeah, in my view, these 4 design problems are the things that have plagued BTD6's post-launch tower releases. And so the reason that I am so hopeful about the MERMONKE is that I see it as the antithesis of all these problems. The MERMONKE doesn't have upgrades that are just the same as the last one over and over and over. It doesn't have a lack of utility. If anything, it has an overabundance of utility. It has an enormous amount of synergy, both in providing the synergy and being a good recipient of the synergy, and it has plenty of specialized purposes if you have a plan for how to use it. And these are just aspects I have sorely missed of BTD6's design that have just felt dead for the past few years of the game's life. Okay, so with all the design problems in mind, I've already mentioned that explain why the Mortar and the Dartling Gunner and the Beast Handler were such flops. I want you to now keep that in mind as I talk to you about what the MERMONKE does, and how it already distinguishes itself. Right off the bat, it's very rare that an unupgraded base tower already adds so much new stuff to the game that didn't exist before. But, well, the MERMONKE does it somehow. Even unupgraded, the MERMONKE already has plenty of completely unique properties that no other tower has. First of all, it is the first base tower in the entire game to be amphibious, as in it can be placed both on land and in water. The only other tower in the game that could have done this before was Pat Fusty, but that was a hero. But beyond that, to punish you for placing the MERMONKE on the ground where it doesn't belong, although you are able to do so, the MERMONKE also has a brand new unique mechanic. If it is not placed in water, it receives a range penalty. And that actually does matter quite a bit because they cleverly designed most of the MERMONKE's upgrades to synergize with range. Having more range allows you to provide more buffs to towers or deal more damage if your shots travel a longer distance, meaning shorter range MERMONKEs will be less effective, even if the range penalty doesn't matter that much from the pure perspective of acquiring targets. This is already far more interesting than your average base tower, which basically just exists as a dart monkey with shuffled stats most of the time. But this is before I even bring up that the MERMONKE is the first new magic monkey added to the game, not only expanding the magic monkeys category, a category that was getting quite small compared to the others, but also making it the very first non-military monkey to be able to go in water, meaning that Oben can actually synergize with water-based monkeys now in the MERMONKE, something completely new that never existed before. All on top of the fact that even the attack of the base MERMONKE has a unique though subtle property. The MERMONKE's tridents actually have 2 sets of pierce rather than 1. Each trident can only hit 2 targets before they disappear, however each time the trident hits a target, it can hit up to 2 other nearby balloons, meaning it has 2 times 3 pierce rather than just having a flat 6 pierce. This not only makes increasing the pierce of MERMONKEs more effective on MERMONKEs than on other towers, but also is just generally a completely new mechanic for the most part. Well, it's effectively a new mechanic anyway. It's basically the same mechanic as the multi-explosion thing with the Hydra rocket pods, but other than that, this is something we've never seen before. At least in BTD6. In BTD5 it was actually a rather common bug to exploit, that a lot of explosives in the game weren't programmed correctly, and so if you gave them pierce boosts they would explode twice rather than just exploding once. Either way, you get the point, it's something brand new. And this is all packed into the base tower. We haven't even started talking about upgrade paths yet. The top path probably starts the most regular, but quickly gets interesting. The first two upgrades are just faster attack speed and travel speed for your trident, but from there you get the ability to grow tentacles, which give you a brand new attack that's not only super powerful, but on top of that also grants a buff to all nearby monkeys in the range of the Mermonkey. A pierce buff, which, while that might not sound too groundbreaking, is actually quite significant. Not only because it's a pierce buff that can be applied to any tower in the game, which as basic as that sounds, that's actually pretty rare. Most pierce buffs in the game are conditional and only work on certain tower types. But on top of that, every other pierce buff in the game for the most part is a flat number. It's like +1 pierce, +2 pierce. This is actually a rare case where the pierce buff is percentage based. It's a 5% boost at tier 3, 15% at tier 4, and 30% at tier 5. And that's a big deal, actually. There's very few percentage-based pierce boosts in the game. The only ones in existence are Shinobi Ninjas, Popseidon Druids, and the Homeland Defense. And sure, 30% extra pierce probably sounds like nothing if you're using it on something that only has 3 pierce in the first place. It's like, whoopee, I get 4 pierce instead of 3. Big deal. But 30% extra pierce on something that already has 100 pierce? That's plus 30 pierce. That's ridiculous. Not to mention the 5th tier also turns nearby land effectively into water, allowing you to actually now place water towers on any land map you want, even if it has no water, by simply getting a Mermonkey on the ground and upgrading it to 5th tier to turn the ground into water. This probably opens up a bunch of new, never-before-seen strategies where you can now beat certain challenges or pull off certain strategies on maps with no water and still make use of your water-based towers. And there's so much to mention, I almost skipped over the fact that Tier 4 effectively has its own sort of Moab glue effect where it inks balloons and Moabs to slow them down. Already, the top path is just packed with both synergy and utility. And notably, for the most part, it's not just the next upgrade is a bigger one and the next upgrade is a bigger one. Sure, the pierce buff gets bigger and the tentacles get stronger with each upgrade, but there are differences between the tiers. The tier 5, as I mentioned, grants the water nearby, the tier 4 adds the ink attack, and the tier 3 is what adds the tentacles and the pierce boost in the first place. Moving down to the middle path, it's probably the most standard one, but even still has plenty of powerful utility and unique mechanics packed into it. The first upgrade's just a simple pierce upgrade, but the second upgrade's already something deceptively interesting. An upgrade that allows its attack to freeze balloons. This is not only utility, but also it's more unique than you might think on first glance. We've seen freezing balloons before, even if it's not all that common outside of the ice tower, but we've never seen freezing balloons on a water tower. In fact, I'm not sure how many of you will be aware, but this is actually the biggest weakness of water in BTD6. As most people know, most water towers are underpriced and a little bit OP on purpose, because water's supposed to be good. But the one time water is bad is when you need stall. Because prior to the Mermonkey, there were absolutely 0 water-based towers that were capable of slowing, stalling, or blowing back balloons. No stuns, no nothing. And so on maps where you were forced to deal with tons of water with very little land to work with, you could get into situations where despite the cost efficiency of water-based towers, you would still severely struggle because you couldn't stop the super ceramics running for the exit. But now the Mermonkey has the ability to freeze at only tier 2 as a water-based tower, making it possible to now stall on all water maps, which wasn't possible before. The third upgrade also introduces an interesting gimmick, where the spears now grow over time the further they travel before they crash into a balloon, causing them to get more damage if they were thrown further distances. Not to mention that when they crash into a balloon or a wall, the tridents, if they have grown large enough, will split into 2 separate shockwaves so that the attack can go in a sort of T-shape and hit multiple targets in a different direction to the initial target. Again, this is a pretty new and unique way of attacking balloons that adds brand new considerations about placement and positioning that never really existed on any other tower before this tower. Even something as basic as something that does more damage the further away it has to shoot, I don't think has really existed yet, unless I'm missing one. Never mind taking the whole bouncing off wall concepts to the next level by obviously making it crash and split into multiple shockwaves on walls instead. Speaking of bouncing on walls, we've got that too, because the 4th upgrade obviously gives you an ability, and that ability is to shoot a stream of ice balls that freeze everything on contact, do loads of damage, have near infinite pierce, and bounce off walls. And while by default they just follow wherever the tower's facing, you even have the ability to manually target this ability wherever you like using the crosshair button, allowing you to, on the right maps, get the perfect angle to bounce shot these ice balls all over the place and get the maximum amount of damage. Again, plenty of new fun synergies here, plenty of new skill expression that didn't exist before. Really, the only upgrade I find a little disappointing on the middle path is probably the 5th tier, Popseidon, which I must admit I have not used all that much because I don't feel like it's very effective in chimps. But generally it just seems to be kind of more damage on the already existing things from the 4th tier, and now the ability lasts longer and also acts as a mini absolute zero that freezes all balloons on the screen. So even the most basic path, which in my opinion would be this middle path, has a lot of interesting, unique aspects to it that didn't exist before and have tons of skill expression and utility. Probably my only criticism, aside from what I already said about Popseidon, is I do think it's kind of ridiculous you need to get the nearly 10,000 cost 4th tier upgrade just to get this thing to pop lead. It's a bit ridiculous that by the 3rd tier it still can't pop lead. But where this really gets spicy is the bottom path, which is definitely my favorite. First of all, I've already been bursting at the seams to talk about even just the first 2 upgrades on this path, because as basic as they sound, I think they have huge implications. The first upgrade grants camera detection and homing shots so that your spears can curve around and hit their targets if they miss initially. A helpful cross path, but nothing groundbreaking. What's much more impactful is Echo Sense Network. This at first appears to be your regular range upgrade, only when you first get it, the range boost is tiny and yet you pay over 400 in cash for it. What's the deal? The deal is that this upgrade is actually a buff to your range that doesn't just apply to the tower you bought it for, but also to every single other Echo Sense Mermonkey on the map. That includes any Mermonkey that has even one upgrade on the bottom path. And this range buff stacks up to 5 times. So if you get 5 Echo Sense monkeys, all 5 of them will be increasing each other's range to have a much larger radius. And as I mentioned, the middle and top paths both want range to get the maximum amount of their benefits. Obviously, the more range you have on the top path, the more towers you can pierce boost, and the more range you have on the middle path, the further away you can shoot balloons and get more damage on your tridents. This makes cross-pathing with this tower actually already really interesting. For example, I would say if you're taking the top path, I do think that the middle path is better for pure DPS, but do you want to take the middle path? Not only if it won't give you camera detection, but if also you're going to have severely reduced range, which means you're not going to be able to buff as many towers with your pierce buff. Maybe if you want to get the most out of the pierce buff, you'd rather take the bottom cross path. And if you're taking the middle path, since that's the main DPS path, you probably think that the extra attack speed would be a no-brainer on the top path. But if you take that extra attack speed, you're not only passing up camera detection, but you're also passing up the ability to have enough range to do good damage with your spears. Those spears or tridents or whatever, I'm going to keep mixing that up. I've been playing too much Overwatch with Orisa and all that. So ultimately, the bottom path, while it just provides range and camo, quote-unquote, is kind of also providing damage in that the longer range gives higher damage spears. So do you really want the attack speed? Really, the only cross path that I think needs help is I really don't know why you would take the pierce cross path with the bottom path. And that's because the gimmick of the bottom path, once you actually get into the final 3 upgrades, is it essentially turns the Mermonkey into a siren that sings a song that entrances balloons and spins them around a clam. This takes them off of the track, spins them around the center of the clam, and then puts them back where they were afterwards, effectively acting like an extremely long and effective stun that just moves the balloons around while they're stunned around a central location. And the reason why you always want to go the top path with this upgrade is because the attack speed boosts explicitly state that they also apply to other attacks besides the trident, which would include, of course, the stun from the song. So taking attack speed means that you get more songs, which means more stuns. Whereas taking increased pierced, at least from what I can see looking at the wiki, doesn't appear to actually allow your songs to grab more balloons, and so there's no reason to take that cross path. Though I imagine that could very easily be fixed by just making the pierce boost also apply to the song. Either way, I love this bottom path, because not only is it more stall, and it's kind of interesting to note that considering there was no stall on any water-based monkey before, we now have 3 forms of it on all 3 upgrade paths, with the top path having the ink to slow down balloons, the middle path having the capability to freeze, and now this bottom path with its own unique way of stunning balloons. Extremely effectively, might I add. Already, the 3rd tier is extremely cheap to say how effective it is at stun-locking balloons, but at the very least, its attacks are still pretty weak, since it doesn't actually buff the damage of the base tower, it just makes it good at stunning things. And in fairness, as good as it is at stunning when it grabs everything, there are limits to how many balloons it can grab and it can get overwhelmed. However, I don't hope it would be controversial to say Symphonic Resonance, the 4th tier upgrade on this path, is broken. I'm not complaining. I'm enjoying the fireworks, but I'm just saying, man, this thing's getting nerfed in a day. Or at least it probably should be, because this upgrade only costs like 4,500, and yet it grants the song the ability to stun not just Moabs, not just BFBs, but even stun and decamo DDTs. And I said DDTs, not one DDT, not two DDTs, we're talking 5, 6, 7 DDTs being grabbed at once and held in place by the song. From one tower, which across the totality of all of its upgrades, barely costs 10,000 in cash in Chimps mode. A tower that costs barely 10,000 that can see camo, decamo with its stun, and mass stun Moabs, BFBs, and DDTs is ludicrously good. But I am not complaining at all, because it's fun as hell. Especially because it also grants you the ability to replace the clan anywhere within the range of the Mermonkey after using it. Meaning you can choose the central location the balloons rotate around while they're stunned, which is really effective for when you have really high PS towers that need to get the most out of their effects, especially explosions. Things like the Mortar have a field day when a horde of BFBs and Moabs are all stun-locked in a circle spinning around the same location. And when you combine that with something like an unstable concoction, oh my god, the chain reaction explosions are ludicrous. Finally, the 5th tier on the bottom path, the Final Harmonic, is another example of some great utility. In fairness, the 4th tier was so broken, it's hard to top. And I will say, I do think it's probably slightly more effective in most cases to spam the 4th tier rather than to buy the 5th tier. But in fairness, that's kind of a good thing, because the 5th tier is almost for a new purpose. The 5th tier does, yes, strengthen the song, but not much more than it was already strong at 4th tier. It grants it the ability to grab zongs, which it couldn't before, and also allows it to hold way more balloons. However, it doesn't actually make it cast faster, so the amount of downtime is still basically identical. Not to mention, at least as far as I've seen, it doesn't suddenly make the tower a powerhouse. Overall, the actual DPS of the Final Harmonic is pretty poor because it's not supposed to be a damage tower, more a support tower. But in the flavor of being a support tower, that means it also provides support outside of just its stun ability. It becomes its own mini Oben, granting +2 PS to all magic monkeys in its range, a buff which can be stacked both with Oben's own +2 PS to magic monkeys and also be stacked with the PS boost from the top path. But that alone would probably be a little bit unimpressive for a 27,000 cost 5th tier. So they add one little sprinkle of extra stuff in there, that being that when you get it to 5th tier, it also provides a buff to all heroes within the range of the tower. This is something new. Aside from Energiser buffing XP gain, but not the tower directly, we've never had anything that specifically buffs heroes as a tower upgrade, so this is a nice change of pace. Now in fairness, it's not like attack speed or pierce or anything like that, it's a range boost plus a cooldown boost. Stats that aren't useless, but usually I wouldn't care that much about. However, specifically in the context of heroes, cooldown boosts actually are quite significant, because of the fact that cooldowns are usually huge parts of the effectiveness of hero picks. I mean, think of how impactful Brickell's Naval Tactics, Pat's Roar, or Etienne's UCAV is, and you can pretty quickly get the idea on why specifically heroes actually do appreciate cooldown boosts a lot. Now in fairness, the cooldown boost and range boost is only 15%. However, to put that in perspective, cooldown boosts are pretty rare things to see in BTD6, and usually come in small numbers. Oben's cooldown boost to magic monkeys is only a 5% boost, and yet it does have impact. Primary mentoring only provides a 10% boost to the cooldowns of primary monkeys, and yet it's still worth it a lot of the time if you're going to get something like a glue strike or a snowstorm. And even Energiser, the single most effective cooldown reducing ability in the game, on land towers only provides a 20% speed boost. So 15% might not blow your socks off, but it's not bad. And you gotta remember that that is a 15% cooldown boost on your hero, plus the 15% range, plus the +2 PS on all magic monkeys, plus the ability to stun zongs, plus the improved PS on the stun. Add it all up and eventually it does add up to quite a lot of effectiveness, which does warrant the price tag. As I said, I still think if you're purely using this to stall, which will be its most common purpose, I do think that spamming 4th tiers is probably more effective, considering the 4th tier is already so effective for such a lower price tag. But certainly I don't think this 5th tier is bad. In fact, the fact that I think it's a little bit more situational is arguably a good thing. It's good when you need it. but you don't feel forced to use it because you're fine stopping at 4th tier if you just wanted the stall and don't care about the support. One last thing before we get off the upgrade pass topic as well is I'd like to take a moment to appreciate the fact that these 5th tiers are far more reasonably priced than what we've seen in recent memory. The Engineer on launch suffered heavily from overpriced 5th tiers, and the Dartling Gunner still today arguably suffers from overpriced 5th tiers, with basically all of them costing 60k or more. And then just when you think it couldn't get worse, then we get the Beast Handler, which when you account the cost of the 4th tiers required to even get the ability to buy the 5th tier, makes almost every single beast impossible to purchase in Chimps, aside from the Powakai, which even then takes more than half of your entire income across a whole game of Chimps because of how much extra cost is incurred from all the condors you have to get just to get the ability to buy the Powakai. Again, thankfully the Mermonkey addresses this. The Final Harmonic is just under 30k, the Lord of the Abyss is just over 30k, and Popseidon is just over 55k. That's the only one that's a little bit on the pricey side, especially considering that at least the ability it grants is not bad, but not that good. Though perhaps I'm underestimating the base tower. As I said, I've not played that much with Popseidon yet because of how overpriced it is. That being said, 56k is certainly a lot more reasonable than what we'd usually get. We've seen plenty of 60 to 80 to even 90k 5th tiers in recent memory, and I'm just glad that we're getting more 5th tiers you can actually use in a real game of Chimps without memeing. You'll love to see it. So needless to say, I heavily appreciate the massive upgrade in design quality we got with the Mermonkey. But now, this late into the video, it's about time I start talking about, you know, the actual strategy for the game we're gonna do here. And while usually I do this last, I think I want to start with this first this time. The map. Flooded Valley. And that is because you might notice it's an expert map. And that's a big deal for me because if you didn't know, I have not actually beaten all the expert maps on Chimps. I've only beaten a couple of them, or at least I had only beaten a couple of them until now. And that isn't because I didn't want to try beating these expert maps on Chimps, but especially when the beginnings of them are so painful, with the pixel-perfect placements and the constant targeting micro, knowing at any moment one blue balloon sneaking towards the exit on any one of the 7 different tracks I'm trying to look at any given time. Obviously, having that knowledge in my head made it really, really difficult to enjoy expert maps. Even though I found them a wonderful challenge when I played them in Challenge Editor, and I could just retry from last round, they were hell on earth to play in actual Chimps, where at any moment I could lose hours worth of progress because of one tiny balloon on a track I'm not currently looking at. And who knows, with how difficult it is to get the pixel perfect placements to get back there, maybe I don't get back there for weeks or months. And I know some people are masochistic enough to be able to cope with that, but I'm gonna be frank, I'm not. I know it, I own it, and yet it's been frustrating because I've always felt that I have the skills necessary to be at least the easy to medium expert maps. Maybe not the hardest of the hard like Ravine or like Bloody Puddles, but certainly most of the expert maps felt within my reach. At least in theory. But I knew there'd be a lot of trial and error, and while I'd be fine with that if I could actually experiment, I didn't want to be in for hours upon hours of placing pixel perfect dart monkeys and constantly target microing just to get another shot at maybe learning the lesson I need to learn to maybe make the map possible the next attempt. And probably the most egregious example of that for the longest time has been Flooded Valley. Because Flooded Valley, to me, seemed well within my reach. I mean, I already thought that I had the skill to beat this map a long time ago, but then especially when the Giga buffs to the Pirate Lord started coming in, it's like, oh my god, this should be a cinch. And yet for the longest time, I never even entertained the notion of playing this map on Chimps, because it's one of those awful maps where the entrance is also the exit, meaning you never know when a balloon is entering or exiting once you get late into the game, and it gets too chaotic to tell which balloons are going which direction. And in a game mode where I constantly need to be paranoid, ready to mash the escape key so that I don't lose all my hours worth of progress, that didn't sound the most appealing. I did actually give it one go, but it did go about exactly as I expected. I managed to abuse the Pirate Lord plus Carrier flagship to make it pretty easily into the 90s, but I think if I remember correctly, somewhere around round 96, there was just a moment where the Pirate Lord just missed a bomb, and I lost track of where the ceramics even were because there was too many balloons on the screen overlapping, and I couldn't see anything, and I thought that I'd actually popped the ceramics, but actually they just snuck under the Moab so I couldn't see them and snuck out the exit. So obviously, having died in the late 90s on a run that I know could have made it and only didn't make it because I didn't see the things that exited,
that kind of showed me, yeah, no, I'm not going to enjoy trying to do this on chimps. Again, not even because I can't do it, but because it's going to be blood-boilingly frustrating. And so I left it for a while. But now we have retry last round in chimps, which has massively reinvigorated my will, I guess, to try expert maps again on chimps. In fact, it's reinvigorated me so much, I didn't record it yet, unfortunately, but I kinda already beat Dark Dungeons on chimps too. And I had a hell of a lot of fun doing it. Finally getting to put to use the strategy that I'd come up with when the map first came out and always wanted to try but could never get far enough to test out in chimps. That being carrier flagship with Sky Shredder, Alk buff on the Sky Shredder, and overclock for the Sky Shredder, which was a pretty effective way to beat that map. And it was pretty satisfying to watch the carnage. But getting back on topic to the map we're playing here. To be quite frank, I'm not a fan of this map, but I just really wanted to do it because, well, it's the expert map that's all themed around water, and we did just get a new water tower, so it just kind of makes sense. I need to cross it off my list anyway. It's a relatively easy expert map when compared to the competition, and to be quite frank, a lot of the reason why I picked this map is because it has one of the least frustrating starts. You do need to land a semi-precise sub-placement at the beginning into another sub-placement mid-round on round 1, but other than that, it's not too bad. No targeting micro or anything like that required, certainly. In fact, fun fact, I actually have beaten this map on chimps twice now. I already beat this map on chimps off camera. I'm so used to usually when I go in to try and beat a map on chimps that I never get it first try. So usually the first try, I don't even bother recording. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I did. I didn't record my first try, and I actually already beat it on my first try, which was a massively refreshing surprise. That's just the power of retry last round, I guess. So I did this chimps run all over again for you just so I could get it on screen so you know I wasn't bullshitting you. Though I say that because it already wasn't too hard the first time, and it certainly got a lot easier the second time once I knew how to go through the motions, because my first run was a little bit scuffed. This run actually went way faster than expected. Usually when I go to record an Unpopular chimps or something like that, even if I do it in one attempt, that one attempt is usually just under an hour long or just over, depending on how many resets I have to do. This one was done in just over 30 minutes, which is like a world record time for me, especially for an expert map. The first attempt where I beat it was basically the same, but it was a bit more scuffed, and I had to rely more on specific ability timings to get the run to work. And that was because in that run, I did not buy a carrier flagship. I relied solely on the Mermonkeys to be my main DPS, and when I got stuck on DDT rounds, I did kind of flop around and end up resorting to buying an unstable concoction and a relentless glue that couldn't see over the dam, just to get the balloons that were stuck in the sort of spinning circle of the stun, so that they could get hit with the concoction and the relentless glue, which was a little bit wasteful of my money. This attempt, I played it a lot more safe because I realized I did need some extra DPS, and hey, why not get a carrier flagship? It also provides an attack speed boost to every single water-based tower on the map. So it had synergy with the Mermonkeys, it was a great mid-game carry, and it would help fill in the gaps in my defense I had in the first time around. The only other difference is because I was more reliant on ability usage, I got one more Arctic Knight, the upgrade that has the ability on it for the Mermonkey with the ice balls. So I had 3 of them in that run rather than 2. Otherwise, though, about the same. With all that said, enough yammering. What's the strat? I mean, you can already kind of see, but let me fully explain it just in case you're missing a piece here. I know you guys are here for the Mermonkey, obviously, the new tower. And I mean, there is still plenty of the Mermonkey in this video. But honestly, this run is a little bit more about the Energiser. Because I've been sort of mildly obsessed with this upgrade for a long time now. You know how big I am with that intro spiel on utility. And the Energiser is kind of like the face of utility when it comes to 5th tiers. I mean, in terms of pure DPS, I mean, it does have good group SRAM and Moab damage, but considering the cost, it is useless at dealing damage. However, when it comes to its ability to support other towers, what it provides sounds pretty good. Aside from the instant decamo the reactor already provided, you also get a global cooldown reduction of 20%. That reduction becomes a 50% reduction on water-based monkeys. And on top of that, any heroes placed within the range of the Energiser will get a 50% bonus to their XP gain for as long as you have the Energiser, allowing you to get heroes to level 20 that couldn't otherwise reach it before the end of the game. Now here's the thing. Maybe it didn't seem so strange to some of you, but it weirded me out that this tower had so much utility packed into it, and yet has basically never really been useful outside of free play.
It weirded me out that the Energiser never found a use in chimps, really. At least not one that I'd heard of. I mean, surely with such a long list of completely unique and irreplaceable utility, surely some strategy out there wants the Energiser. And yet, I couldn't find anything. At least not anything that seemed real. I tried with a lot of abilities, but it seemed like just about every ground-based monkey's abilities didn't get enough benefit for it to be worth the 40k price tag when you also consider previous upgrades. Probably the best candidate was probably the Tsar Bomber, and I don't even think the Tsar Bomber's a very good tower in the first place, so combining two terrible towers to make one of them slightly less terrible didn't seem like a great option. That would mean you'd instead have to be getting water monkeys, which I mean doesn't sound like a bad restriction at first, until you actually look at the options you have. It's likely intentional, but still it stings that the Energiser provides such an enormous buff to water-based monkeys, and yet every single water-based monkey frankly has awful abilities. The first strike might seem like a really good ability considering it's used extensively as a way of insta-killing the bad on round 100 in chimps mode. However, have you ever seen it used for anything else? You might notice you don't really see it used for anything else. And that's because outside of killing the bad, it's only ever used to get like one instant kill on a single Zong every 90 seconds, which is kind of pitiful. The splash damage on this thing is pathetic, the single target is the only thing that's good, and even the single target cannot solo a fortified Zong, only a normal Zong. In other words, yeah, it's pathetic and useless for anything other than killing the bad, in which case you don't need the ability to come back faster because you only need it once. If you're wondering whether the Pre-Emptive strike upgrades the ability and makes it better, the only way in which it upgrades it is by halving the cooldown, which is what we were already doing. So I guess you can nuke a Zong every 22.5 seconds if you got Energiser Pre-Emptive Strike, but it just seems like it might be a bit more effective to instead just get a tower that can kill Zongs. So the first strike is out of it, like nah, that's not even an option. The Pirate Lord is a slightly more feasible option, but I don't think really works. The Pirate Lord is strong for its DPS output, not its ability. The ability is mostly just a way to slightly thin out waves. The main thing that the Pirate Lord is worried about is DDTs and the bad. The hook-in ability does nothing against the bad, and while it can hook in DDTs, they need to be decamoed first, or you need to bite the bullet and take the weaker cross path to see camo inherently. Not to mention, even once you do, DDTs show up in hordes and you can only hook 2 at a time, so it's still not a solution to DDTs, just something that makes them slightly less bad, but they're still going to murder you unless you get a real answer to DDTs. And so as a result, the hook-in ability is pretty useless too, honestly, because the group mobs it's the most effective against is already the kind of stuff that a Pirate Lord will blow to smithereens with its ludicrously powerful cannons anyway. I don't know, I guess it's pretty good against fortified Zongs because they have so much health that the Pirate Lord struggles against them. But the thing is that there's only 2 fortified Zongs in the entire game of chimps, and those are the 2 that come on round 97. And that's already probably the easiest round in the last 10 rounds of the game. And until the Mermonkey came out, that was it. The only other abilities you get back faster were from heroes. For a moment, I thought there might be a blind spot here. I thought that perhaps people forgetting that Pat was also an amphibious tower before the Mermonkey was, meant that Pat could get the buff from Energiser. I thought that might be a little secret that actually would lead to a good strategy. Unfortunately, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, while Energiser does improve the uptime of Rallying Roar, it just feels like it's still not enough. You still only have it up just under 2/3 of the time, which isn't bad, but when you consider that's a 40k investment, it's not exactly a steal. Not to mention that a lot of the targets you'd want to buff with Pat are ground-based towers, and yet you have to place them in the water to get the buff, which only makes things more awkward. Then factor in that Pat also has to be in the range of the Energiser when there's limited space around Pat to get the Rallying Roar buff, and yeah, it's just more and more problems. Which only leaves one other option. Brickell. And don't get me wrong, Brickell is a good option. The Mega Mine is nice to have more often, but not critical. What's really good is Naval Tactics. For those of you who aren't aware, Naval Tactics is one of the most broken abilities in the game and the whole reason that Brickell is such a good hero. The only thing that keeps it in check is the fact that the downtime on the ability is so severe. It doesn't last that long, and the wait time to get another Naval Tactics is extremely long. If there was a way to get 100% uptime Naval Tactics, you could make this entire game a breeze. Of course there isn't, because that would make this game a joke, but you can certainly get close with Energiser. Getting naval tactics twice as often is actually a pretty big deal. Not to mention, it also gives you level 20 before the end of the game. In fairness, Brickell's level 20 is not typically super effective, because it just increases the damage of Megamind, which compared to other level 10 abilities on heroes is not the most impressive. However, in this case, even that's pretty good, because of the fact you're also getting twice as many Megaminds that are now doing way more damage than usual because they're level 20. So honestly, even Megamind gets pretty decent when you use Energizers to get level 20 and get twice the amount of Megaminds. This was all possible before the release of the Mermonkey. However, I can tell you from experience, I tried Energiser with Brickell. And okay, don't get me wrong. You could run it and it wasn't terrible, but it was just never optimal, if you know what I mean. With that amount of money, it was just always better to simply get a better defense that didn't need more abilities to stay alive. Especially considering that level 20 Brickell, while nice, is not very important. The Energiser really just isn't necessary, although you can beat chimps with the Energiser just using Brickell as its main target. It's just so much easier to just go like flagship, pirate lord plus preemptive strike or something like that. The only other thing I could think to do was the obvious, and that was to find a hero with a devastating level 20 ability and use Energizer to get it early. But quite frankly, a lot of level 20 abilities on heroes are underwhelming. And some of the few ones that are pretty impactful, like Striker Jones, you don't need Energizer to get before the end of the game. Obviously, the big target is Azili. Azili with Energizer is a pretty good combo because then you get the Mob Hex that's able to insta-kill the bad easily. But, like, you could just get a first strike, and that's only like 15k. Whereas, if you run Energizer Azili, that's 40k, plus you have to run Azili, who is, quite frankly, just a weaker hero than the other options. I know this is a bit long-winded, but I just really want to hammer in. It felt ludicrous to me that the Energizer did so many things no other tower could, and yet no one could find a way to make it good. Especially the fact it gave you twice as fast water-based abilities, and yet there was nothing you could use it on to make it worthwhile. Nothing except Brickell, but Brickell alone was never enough to cut it considering how high the price tag was. It felt like this tower always just needed a little push. And personally, I originally expected that push to be the price going down by about 10,000, even if that meant maybe it would lose a bit of damage. If the Energizer was cheaper than your flagships or your Pirate Lords, then maybe then it would be worthwhile. But especially knowing you're putting in all this effort just to get a tower that's not even better than something cheaper than it that does its job automatically is a pretty tough thing to swallow. But honestly, I think the Mermonkey might have been that last little push that the Energizer needed, because it gave us one last water-based ability to use. That, of course, being the Arctic Knight's Ice Balls. And this ability is extremely powerful, spammable because it doesn't cost that much for the 4th tier, it's 8,000 to get the upgrade. And this is already an ability that's extremely powerful for the price tag. The only downside is that it has a very low uptime. Long wait time to use again, very short duration. And so, this is exactly where you want the Energizer. So that's why we're running Energizer here, because now that the Mermonkey has a water-based ability that's actually valuable and also wants its cooldown reduced, even just one valuable water-based ability was all we needed to give the Energizer the push it needed to be worthwhile so long as you combo it with Brickell. And it definitely helped that the Final Harmonic also provides cooldown reduction on heroes, an extra 15%, meaning that by the end of this game, Admiral Brickell's chilling there with 65% reduction to cooldown time, 15 plus 50. Meaning essentially, we're not just getting things at double speed, we're getting our naval tactics up at triple speed. That is a huge deal. This strategy would not be feasible otherwise. While the song stun is really effective, we mostly want it to target Moabs. The ceramics, there's just too many of them and they're too fast. We can't rely on the song to pick up all the ceramics. So we need to freeze the ceramics. And while just the normal attack on these Arctic Knights is capable of that, it also is likely going to get pierce capped in the later rounds before it can hit its target. Meaning we will regularly have to use the ice balls to freeze all the super ceramics before they run for the exit. And again, without Energizer, this would just not be possible. The downtime is so atrocious that you just could not get by. But with the doubled uptime of the ability, with how much quicker the abilities come back with Energizer, combined with the fact that the stuns from the song means that we can kind of time when things get cracked open,
and make sure that the mobs don't actually break open until we're ready to use the ice jets to completely freeze all the insides and make sure they don't move an inch, now we have a terrifying defense to contend with. Though admittedly a very micro-heavy one, but hey, what you gonna do? I mean, what else were we gonna do with Energiser? Frankly, I'm just so glad I finally found the use case for Energiser. I was going mad, man. I know that Energiser technically already got an episode back when we covered Corvus, but I never really liked how Energiser never really was important in that run. I even acknowledged that if you take Energiser out of the picture here, Corvus probably still, solos this. And the Energiser wasn't even the optimum pick, it was literally just like for fun. In fact, the main reason I even decided to do that was because at that point I had tried so many combos with Energiser that didn't work, that I'd finally realized, you know what, I don't think Energiser's ever gonna work. So this is the best it's gonna get. It's just sort of being the sidekick in a video that's really about Corvus. And I suppose, maybe in this video, it comes off a bit as the sidekick to the Mermonkey, but that's just because the Mermonkey's new. When you really think about what's most integral to the strategy, it's really the Energiser that carries the strategy here. It's just the Energiser didn't have the power to carry it until we got the new water-based ability from the MERMONKE. So yeah, now with the power of retry last round in Chimps, I feel like I have a lot more freedom to try a lot of the harder challenges in the game, and I feel like it's going to help me grow a lot. I really don't understand how this wasn't here from launch, but I'm not going to complain that I have it now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.